G'day and welcome to Travel Pointers, the brand new Australian podcast with news and tips for frequent flyers. I'm Matt Graham, the editor of Australian Frequent Flyer.
And I'm Chris Chamberlin, news editor at Point Hacks. Later today, we'll talk about how you can use Qantas Frequent Flyer points to fly right around the world, and also why Central Asia should be on your travel radar. But first, we should probably explain what this podcast is all about. Matt?
Yeah, that's right, Chris. Well, some of you may remember the AFF On Air podcast, which I hosted from 2019 until last year, and you might also be familiar with Points of View, the original Point Hacks podcast, which Chris was a regular guest on. The new Travel Pointers podcast is going to take the best parts of both of those podcasts. Each month, some of Australia's leading travel and frequent flyer program experts will discuss the latest airline and loyalty program news, and will help you to make the most of your frequent flyer points with lots of tips and pointers. So the idea is we'll aim to release a new episode each month, and in each episode we'll talk about some of the news of the past month, we'll talk about some of our own travel experiences, both in Australia and around the world, and we'll discuss some of the ways you can maximize your frequent flyer points and status. Some episodes will also have interviews with key people from the airline and travel industry. So that's a little bit what Travel Pointers is about. But Chris, would you like to maybe introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So at Point Hacks, I have the very fun job of basically flying right around the world, writing about it. We do flight reviews. We publish a lot of news. We do interviews and all that sort of stuff. So, and if you're not familiar with Point Hacks, it's pointhacks.com.au firstly, but we publish a great amount of travel content. It's not just about the front of the plane. We write for everybody. We show how travel can be affordable, but also how anybody can fly first class. Or if you are going to fly economy, how you can do it for a lot less than what you'd normally pay. We look at how you can earn and maximize your frequent flyer points, how you can make the most of rewards programs, how you can use benefits of status to get things like free lounge access or even free breakfast at hotels. And we also, inspire you by showing some of the most amazing things you can do with points, which we publish called experiences.
Yeah, great. And I'll just introduce myself for anyone who might not be aware. I'm Matt from AFF, Australian Frequent Flyer Forum. So we also have news and tips and guides on our site. But the main thing about AFF is really the forum. We have a very vibrant community of frequent flyers and people who are collecting points. And it's a place you can go and discuss the latest news, get tips from other members on the forum about all things to do with frequent flyer points. We have a very active Qantas forum and wine forum in particular. Also member trip reports where you can read and have a look at the photos of trips that some of the other members have taken. And I also host webinars on AFF. The two sites are quite complementary, I'd say. So it's great to be joining forces on this podcast. And on that note, let's get straight into it. So, Chris, for the first episode, I wanted to have a quick chat about some of the recent news. And one of the, exciting announcements from the last month or so is that Qantas has started a non-stop flight to France.
That's right. So they were flying to London out of Perth. They were flying to Rome seasonally. Now they have just gone to Paris, and just in time for the Olympics. They got their first flight in just before that. So it's, I think, been about 20 years since Qantas had a service to Paris, and it was the first direct flight between Australia and France ever for commercial aviation. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is. I had a look. I think back in 2004, Qantas used to fly a 747 to Paris via Singapore. But this flight, of course, removes the need for the stop in Singapore. Now with the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, it can make the, it's about, 17 hours, I think, non-stop
Yeah, 16, 17.
Paris.
Yeah.
Would you book a ticket?
Good question. So look, firstly, I'll preface this by saying I live in Melbourne, so I'm very fortunate to have a lot of amazing options to get to Paris. So until this flight started, even if I wanted my Qantas points and status, I could book like a QF codeshare on Emirates via Dubai. I could fly Qantas to Singapore and jump on a codeshare on Air France, or book any number of other airlines. So the hard part of this for me living in Melbourne is that I have to take a domestic flight to Perth first. From Melbourne, I have to stop somewhere anyway. It's not a direct flight for me yet. So if you're living in Perth, I can see why there'd be an amazing appeal to just get on the plane, get right off and go straight to the Eiffel Tower. For me, especially if I'm down the back, I always like to stop somewhere roughly halfway and just stretch my legs and get a bit of air. So
yeah, it is a long time, 17 hours non-stop in the air.
Yeah.
I probably agree. I do prefer to get off halfway and stretch my legs. But yeah, absolutely, I can see the appeal if you just want to get there as quickly as possible. There is no quicker way than non-stop, especially for those in Perth. Another recent announcement from Qantas was they launched Qantas Club flexible memberships. What's that about?
Yeah, so up until now, if you wanted to be a Qantas Club member, you had to pay by the year. So you could pay for 1, 2, or 4 years at a time. But let's just say you were taking one family holiday a year. You just wanted to go in the lounge on that trip. You've got a couple of flights together within a couple of weeks, and that 1 year membership is just it's too expensive for what you get. You look at what you're paying. It's like $700 plus a joining fee for 1 year of membership. If you're only going in the lounge once or twice, that's a very expensive coffee and toasted sandwich, right? You could spend that money a lot better at a nice restaurant at the airport. So what the flexible membership does is it allows people to pay for Qantas Club access per 28-day period. So if you only want 1 month of membership, you don't have to pay for the full year. And so it's if you want that little one-off, that quick short-term access, it's not necessarily a bad way to go. You still have to pay Qantas's $129 joining fee, and then you also pay $99 for 28 days. So you're still paying a bit more than $200 to get into the lounge, but compared to $700 plus joining fee, it's a bit cheaper. So it's probably best for those people who have a lot of flights in a very short span of time that aren't in a premium cabin, because you'll get the most out of that. If though you're the kind of person that's already paying year on year, you're probably better off keeping that because the pricing is better if you pay per annum.
There's a couple of differences as well. I believe the flexible membership doesn't include a guest allowance or access to partner and associated lounges.
Yeah, that's right. And it also doesn't include the extra baggage allowance normally. It's something Qantas is offering as a short-term incentive to get people to sign up. But from early next year, you won't get the extra baggage that Qantas Club members can normally get, which is up to, I think, 96 kilos if you're flying economy to or from the Americas. You get 3 times 32 kilo bags. And the other thing is, if you are an AFF member and you have a gold or platinum membership with AFF, you get 20% off Qantas Club membership fees. That applies to those year-long membership fees. So you get the best value membership, and then it's even cheaper, but there is no discount on those month by months. And once you've had that subscription for, I think, 4 or 5 months, you may as well have just paid for the whole year.
Some sad news as well, Chris. Rex went into voluntary administration on the 30th of July. So they were flying 737s between the major capital cities, and that's in addition to their regional network, which they flew with subs. Now, they are still flying the subs to country towns, but the 737 operation is now grounded, and Virgin, Qantas and Jetstar have offered to rebook Rex customers who had tickets that Rex wasn't able to honour. But Chris, Rex, it was an interesting thing they did with the 737s. They were doing that for just over 3 years. The flights were generally reliable. They took off and landed on time most of the time. The service on board was pretty good. You got a free bag and a snack on board, and they made it quite easy to upgrade to business class as well. But obviously that wasn't enough to keep them profitable.
Sadly not. I mean, I flew Rex a number of times on their jets, and I can't say I ever had a passenger sit directly next to me in economy. I always had a spare middle seat, and so if every middle seat's empty, that's 2/3 of the plane full. That's not enough to justify all the costs they face to fly, everything else that goes into it. But it's quite unfortunate because they were a very welcome challenger to Qantas and Virgin on the route. It meant that fares had come down, the other airlines were price matching or reducing their fares. You'd often see, at the time that Rex was departing, that airfares on the other airlines would become a lot more affordable.
Oh, not on Qantas, but on Virgin, certainly.
I've seen Qantas come down in business. I've never seen them do $499 for business class on the East Coast until after Rex came in, but it's not a complete match, but it was still lower. But you are right, Rex had some fantastic airfares. It got to the point where at work I actually said, look, Rex business class is $20 more than Qantas economy. Is it fine if I just book that and pay the difference? And we actually changed our policies so that we could fly Rex if we wanted to and sit at the front of the plane. It was that good value. So it's really unfortunate, though, for Rex's staff. A lot of them were actually hired by Rex during all of the COVID shutdowns and everything that was happening. So a lot of the cabin crew I spoke to used to work for VA, used to work for Air New Zealand. And unfortunately now their future is up in arms as well.
At the end of the day, I had a look at some of the loads on their capital city routes recently, and they were consistently around half full on those flights. And the airfares they were charging as well, they just weren't able to attract a price premium. So they were the revenue just wasn't there to keep the operation running sustainably. But I think as well, they didn't do enough to try and capture those rusted on loyal Qantas flyers or Virgin flyers who often wouldn't even consider Rex because, up until late last year, Rex didn't even have a frequent flyer program.
Yeah, exactly. So, even these days, if you're flying Jetstar, you can earn Qantas points and status credits. So Rex really needed to hurry up and get into that space to compete. And unfortunately, Rex didn't launch its Rex Flyer program until late in 2023. So that was, nearly 2 years after all the borders came down. Everyone's back in the air traveling. The other airlines have all done their status extensions. They've done double and even recently triple status credits promotions to keep their flyers rusted on. The big thing that Rex did not do is a status match. And we've seen airlines all over the world do that. We saw our domestic carriers do that. And that is where you try and poach the elite frequent flyers of other carriers by saying, hey, you've got gold over there. Come to us. We'll just give you gold for a period of time so that you get the lounge access, you get the priority treatment that you expect, and you can just come take your first flight with us as though you're already a regular traveler. And we just didn't see Rex do that.
And I think even right up until the end, a lot of people didn't know they existed or just thought that they were still flying, turboprops into country towns. So I think they could have done a lot more with marketing as well.
Yeah, we see a lot of people online mistake their name as Rex Jet, which would have, I think, been a slightly better name for their jet operations to at least highlight that they're not just a regional, carrier, not just flying the small regional aircraft. They had a fleet of Boeing 737s, some of which came from Virgin Australia during administration. So it's a product that people are familiar with. It's an aircraft that their competitors are already flying on routes that their competitors are flying. So the flights were there, the seats were there. People just weren't booking enough of them.
Australians also can now visit China without a visa for up to 15 days until, at this stage, it's until the end of 2025. And that's quite an interesting development. It's actually not the only country that's offering visa-free travel to Australians until the end of 25. Mongolia is another one. And I recently took advantage of that. It was an excellent trip. But yeah, Chris, you no longer need to go to the embassy and get a visa or try and use the Transit Without Visa program.
How good? How good? Honestly, like there are so many countries that have these, very, very rigid visa requirements. And to be honest, what they do is they stop people from traveling. They make people go somewhere else, or they make people have to plan far enough ahead that they've got to get all the paperwork right. I've lost count of how many trips I've had to change or cancel because a visa didn't come through in time or some technicality with a form or something, when you can just get on a plane and go and spend your money in that country, which is what countries want from tourists. To be able to do that a lot easier is a fantastic thing. So China has always traditionally needed a visa if you're on an Australian passport. There were just those few exceptions. If you're just popping across the border from Hong Kong into Shenzhen, you didn't need a pre-arranged visa, or if you had an APEC card, or as you mentioned, Matt, the transit without visa, which means you're really going somewhere else other than China. But to just be able to fly there and not have to do all of that paperwork is just wonderful. It makes travel is even more open than it was pre-COVID. And I just think that's fantastic.
Absolutely. It'd be great to see that from a few more countries as well.
Absolutely.
New to the world of points or want to level up your game? You can learn even more and improve your travel experience with Australian Frequent Flyer membership. It's completely free to join AFF and participate fully on our lively discussion forums. But did you know that AFF also offers Gold and Platinum memberships with even more benefits? AFF Platinum members get access to our full library of frequent flyer training courses and can attend all AFF webinars. There's 8 per year that I host. And AFF Gold and Platinum members also enjoy discounts with Qantas Club, Lounge Pair, Frequent Flyer Concierge, and more. For full details or to sign up, visit australianfrequentflyer.com.au or click on the link in the show notes.
So one of the things we wanted to dive into on this podcast is one of those little, I won't call it a secret because people do know about it, but it is one of the more advanced plays in Qantas Frequent Flyer. And for those in the know, it's called a Oneworld Classic Flight Reward. It doesn't just mean booking a Oneworld flight with your points. It's a certain type of ticket with Qantas, and people generally use this to fly right around the world. In fact, you can book a literal round-the-world ticket through this tool. Now, it's a bit of a hack because the number of points you need actually is not that high compared to the value that you get. So if you want a round-the-world ticket in first class, it's 455,000 Qantas points. That's actually the exact same number that you need for a return ticket on those longest flights. So if you flew Sydney to London and back in first class on a partner airline with your Qantas points, that you could actually go right around the world for the same number. So in economy, you only need 132,400 Qantas points to be precise. Premium economy is 249,600 and business class is 318,000. As you can probably imagine, business class is the most popular way to do it, but you can choose any cabin and there's so much that you can do with these awards. So Matt, take it away.
Yeah, it's probably just worth mentioning as well that you do still have to pay the taxes and carrier charges, which
Hmm.
in general it depends on the airlines you're flying and which destinations you're flying to. It's usually between about probably $1,000 and $2,000 per passenger, but still compared to the cost of an actual business class around the world ticket, if you're paying money, that is extraordinarily good value for 318,000 points. There's a lot you can do with one of these One World Classic Flight Rewards. You do get up to 5 stopovers, so those can be anywhere that One World Airlines fly to, and you can travel up to 35,000 miles in total, which gives you quite a lot of wiggle room there. You can have up to 16 flight sectors in total on the booking, although if you want to book on the Qantas website, it won't actually price on the Qantas website if there's more than 10, but in that case, you can still call up and book over the phone. So up to 16 flight sectors. The main catch, I guess, if you want to call it that, is that you have to use One World member airlines. So the One World member airlines, Qantas, of course, is one of those. But you've also got airlines like Malaysia Airlines, Japan Airlines. There's British Airways, Iberia, Finnair, American Airlines, Alaska Airlines, Royal Jordanian, Royal Emirates. Have I missed any, Chris?
Oh, Sri Lankan Airlines off the top of my
Oh,
head.
yes.
Did you
Yeah.
mention Cathay Pacific? What else do we've got a lot. You've got Qatar, but there's not a lot of seats on Qatar. We'll get to that.
Yeah, Qatar Airways is a little bit tricky because they only release business class and first class reward seats to book through Qantas Frequent Flyer 3 days before departure. So, not particularly useful
Yeah.
if you're trying to book one of these round the world tickets. But yeah, you can use any of the One World Airlines in any case. You just have to use at least two of them that are not Qantas. You can also use Qantas if you want, but that doesn't count towards the two. You can use 5 or 6 as well if you want. There's no limit. But also, you can only use One World Airlines as part of this. So, for example, if you found one of the flights was available through Emirates to book using Qantas points, I mean, you can book Emirates flights using Qantas points, but they're not in One World, so you unfortunately can't use it as part of this particular One World Classic Flight Reward. There's a limit of 1 stopover and up to 2 transits of under 24 hours in each city. But you can have surface sectors. They count as 1 stopover. So, for example, if you flew into London and then you decided to take the train over to Paris and take your next leg out of Paris, that just counts as 1 stopover. It also counts as one of the sectors of your maximum of 16. But yeah, it is perfectly fine and allowed.
So there are a lot of rules, but there's a lot of great things you can do with this ticket. So you've booked a couple of these, Matt, and I had to admire the number of flights and things that you were able to get on one of these. I'll say round the world ticket because that for you that's what it was, but one of these One World Classic Flight Rewards. So what's one of the ones that you've been able to book because it's quite impressive.
I'll take you through one of the itineraries that I booked. Now, this particular one was actually in economy class. Now, I was quite a bit younger. I didn't have that many points, but I was very keen to travel, and I was booking about a month out from departure. So the availability was a bit tricky, but I was able to get an itinerary that I was very happy with, and it came in just under the 35,000 mile limit as well. So that worked out really nicely. So I started in Sydney. My first stopover was actually in Brisbane. I wanted to go up and see family in Brisbane, so I tacked that on at the start. And then I flew Brisbane to Adelaide to Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. They had an overnight stop in Kuala Lumpur along the way because that was under 24 hours. It didn't count as one of the stopovers. But so Beijing was the second stopover. So that was flying Qantas on the domestic legs and then Malaysia Airlines up to Beijing. And then after a stop in Beijing, I flew Japan Airlines to Paris via Tokyo. That also happened to be my very first flight on a Boeing 787. I'm not sure if you recall, Chris, Japan Airlines uses a very lovely 242
They
layout in
do.
economy.
If you're going to fly economy on a Dreamliner, go for those Japanese carriers. You did that very well.
Yeah, of course, most airlines have gone with 9 across seating in economy on the 787, but Japan Airlines does have 8 across. The seats were very wide and comfortable, and I naively thought that that's what all 787s were going to be like. So it was a little bit of a shock next time I got on a 787 on a different airline. But
It's a bit of a happy accident. That worked out quite well for you.
yeah, yeah. So over to Paris, had a stop over there, and then I flew British Airways via London Heathrow to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. That was my next stopover. Then from Rio de Janeiro to Dallas Fort Worth via Miami on American Airlines. Had a stopover in Dallas, and finally Dallas Fort Worth to Sydney on Qantas on that lovely QF8 flight. That flight was actually quite memorable. It was an A380 back when I did this trip, and they actually delayed the flight overnight. So it left the next morning instead of usually leaves in the evening. And because most other passengers had been rerouted by that time onto other flights, there were only about 100 people on board. by the time that flight actually left. So there was three of us in the back of in the back section of economy, each with a row of seats and very attentive service. So
You're about to tell me you got to spend that whole flight lying down on an economy ticket, aren't you?
I actually did. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a very, very lucky accident. And for me, I wasn't in a hurry, so it was actually completely fine.
It's one of the world's longest flights, and you just nabbed a bed at an economy price. Well
Yeah,
done. Well done.
nice when it works out. But yeah, that's one of the ones that I've been able to book. Chris, how would you go about actually booking one of these?
So the first thing you need to do is to find the reward seats, because you won't be able to book the entire ticket unless you can find eligible flights to fill really the entire ticket. So if I'm planning one of these, generally I would just go to the Qantas website and search sector by sector. If I want to fly from Sydney to LA, I'll try and find a flight to LA. If I want to then go from LA to London, I'll search that separately, and I'll just make a note of what I'm finding as I'm going. Once you know what you want to book and then you know that you can book it, go to the multi-city tool on the Qantas website. Now, don't click round the world, because that is for people purchasing round the world tickets at full price, and you don't want to pay $13,000 or something insane for a round the world business class ticket. You want to use those points. So you use the multi-city tool and you tick use points, classic rewards. And then flight by flight, you type out where you want to go. And even if you're trying to book a transit somewhere, or like what Matt did where he spent less than 24 hours in Malaysia, what you want to do is just put where you plan to actually have your proper stopovers. So if, on my example, if you wanted to stop over in LA, let's say you're starting in Brisbane via Sydney, you want to go to LA, that first leg, you just type Brisbane to LA. And if you happen to choose a flight via Sydney, that's fine. So just put in where you want to fly and where you want to land and stop and spend some time. This part of the website does have a few little quirks. The Qantas booking engine sometimes likes to behave, sometimes it doesn't, depending on which airlines and combinations. And so you might be able to do this online. And if you can, and if all the numbers add up, it'll be all correct at the bottom, and you can check out and book online. But a lot of people do end up having to call the Qantas Frequent Flyer Centre. And if you are going to do that, that's when your list of flights comes in handy, because the agent on the phone can literally type in the booking that you want and put it through. So technically, also, once you've got your ticket, you are able to modify it a little bit, possibly add some sectors into it. That can happen if you're planning very, very far in advance and say the last flights in your itinerary aren't even on sale yet, but you want to grab the rest of them. Just be aware it's not guaranteed. Some of Qantas's agents don't know how to do it, or they might be not so willing to go in and modify a very complex ticket. So if you are going to book, it is better to just do it all at once if you can. And if you are having any trouble with the website, just give them a call. It's a complicated booking, so it makes sure that it's correct. The hardest part is always finding those reward seats, which is why I suggested doing that as step one. So this is not so much a problem in economy, because there's generally a decent amount of availability unless you're flying at some uber peak time like school holidays at the last minute. But if you're trying to do this in business class or in first class, which is very, very difficult, it's doable, but it's difficult. You're going to want to find those reward seats first. And that's where, Point Hacks Concierge, Australian Frequent Flyer Concierge come in if you need help finding them. But there are a lot of ways you can do this online. And if you do use the Qantas website, given you are spending Qantas points, to search those flights one by one, you'll hopefully find something that suits, even if you have to be slightly flexible on dates or transit somewhere that, you might not prefer to do that. You might want to fly nonstop, but it's the same as when using your points to book a one-way flight. So to be honest, once you've got the first flight sorted, it's a bit smoother sailing from there. Getting out of Australia is often the hardest part, because everyone wants those flatbeds, across the Pacific. They want those flatbeds to Europe. So if you can find those out of Australia, getting the bed on the connection is generally a bit easier. So fingers crossed you can pull this off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just point out, I'll put a link in the show notes for an article on AFF about how to book one of these. There are some tips on how to get the multi-city tool on the Qantas website to behave. So, there's a few sort of quirks of the multi-city tool, but if you know what the quirks are and you can work around those, it does make it a little bit easier to book one of these online. And yeah, just on the topic of premium cabin award seats out of Australia, it can be a little bit difficult to find seats on Oneworld Airlines, but there are options, particularly if you're flexible with your travel dates and you're not trying to book a seat over Christmas or school holidays or things like that. And I just want to give you a few examples of routes that may have availability. One of those is Malaysia Airlines into Kuala Lumpur. So Malaysia Airlines flies from Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney into Kuala Lumpur. Most of those are on A330s with lie flat business class seats. I recently flew back from KL to Sydney, actually, in that product using my Qantas points. It was a very comfortable bed, and the satay on board was excellent.
Oh, yes.
Probably the best thing about flying Malaysia Airlines. And they often release up to 2 business class seats on each flight that you can book through using your Qantas points. So that can be handy. There's also Sri Lankan Airlines out of Sydney or Melbourne into Colombo. You sometimes can get Japan Airlines seats from Sydney or Melbourne to Tokyo. There's sometimes availability on Qantas as well into places like Jakarta or Manila, Hong Kong, India, sometimes Japan. And if you wanted to get over to New Zealand or the Pacific Islands as well, that's usually not too much of an issue on Qantas business class. There's also British Airways to Singapore. British Airways does have a Fifth Freedom flight from Sydney to Singapore running every day. You can sometimes find seats on that. And if you're looking for premium economy, Cathay Pacific into Hong Kong sometimes has availability as well into Hong Kong and also beyond to Europe or to North America. There will also be Fiji Airways becoming an option next year. They're going to join Oneworld next year as a full alliance member. So then that will be an option as well. And Oman Air is coming too. So
that's exciting with Fiji Airways because they often have a lot of business class between Nandi and their destinations in North America. So if I can't find a business class seat to LA direct, trying to fly via Fiji does that quite well. And the cost in Qantas points currently is the same as flying Qantas itself. So once they become part of this Oneworld award, even better.
Definitely. And Fiji Airways also has no carrier charges or fuel surcharges. So you're just paying the airport taxes. And selfishly, as well, as someone who lives in Canberra, Fiji Airways does fly direct out of Canberra. So I can fly one stop with them over to North America or even to Hong Kong or Tokyo or Singapore. So that'll be a great addition to the Oneworld Award. So as Chris said, it can be a little bit tricky to plan and book one of these, but it is doable and it's absolutely worth it.
Do you need some help to find those elusive frequent flyer reward seats at the front of the plane? Sign up to the free Point Hacks Reward Seat Alerts newsletter and be the first to know when we find new reward seats to popular destinations with your favorite frequent flyer programs. Go to pointhacks.com.au/reward seat alerts or click on the link in the show notes to sign up.
Well, Central Asia, perhaps better known as the Stans, is not often high on people's travel radars. And I'll be honest, I've been there a couple of times, and when I've told people that I'm going to Kazakhstan, the first thing they think of is usually Borat.
Very nice, Matt, very nice.
But it could be one of the most underrated parts of the world. Now, Chris and I visited Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan together at the start of this year. Chris, do you think it was worth going?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was such a last minute trip, and we organized it. You sent me a message. Oh, I'm gonna go spend New Year in Uzbekistan. Do you want to come? I'm like, that sounds kind of fun. I have not been to that part of the world before. It was my first visit to any of the stands, and it's an amazing place. I probably would say Uzbekistan is now my favorite country.
Wow,
it's so peaceful for starters. So you look at, where things are on a map and you read Smart Traveler, and there are a lot of, things that you read about various parts of the world, but it is such a safe, calm place. It's a beautiful place to visit. Everyone is so nice and friendly. There aren't a lot of tourists there because it's not a Singapore or a London. It's, Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Some people wouldn't know where Tashkent is in the first place. So it's just beautiful. I cannot overemphasize just how picturesque the country is, how wonderful the food is. You're right near some great countries like Georgia, where there are some beautiful red wines. Matt, I know that was one of the motivators for flying a certain airline that we booked to get there, was just to try their beautiful Georgian red wine on the way to Uzbekistan. But it was just fantastic. It blew my mind, and I really want to go back there and spend some more time there.
Yeah, I can only agree. One of the things we want to do in this podcast is give you a little bit of travel inspiration, whether that's about destinations or airlines or even airport lounges, things like that. And yeah, I thought today we'd talk about Central Asia because, as I said, we have been there recently. And Chris, I totally agree. It's one of my absolute favorite places in the world to travel. it's just got everything. It was part of the Silk Road between China and the West. It was part of the Persian Empire, and it's got a lot of history, particularly in Uzbekistan, that you can see relating to that. It was part of the Soviet bloc for quite some time, and now each of the different stands, there's five main ones, is sort of developing into their own unique identity in the post-Soviet era, and actually they're quite developed. Chris, so we visited three cities in Uzbekistan: Tashkent, Bukhara, and Samarkand. For anyone who might not have heard of these places, what kind of things are there to do there?
So, firstly, I will just preface this by saying before this trip, my favorite country to visit was Russia. It was just so different to being here in Australia. There's so much culture, and I really found that in Uzbekistan. But just the fact that it's that little bit more open really just made you feel that little bit safer, a little bit more comfortable to explore. And I mean, we started in Tashkent. It is a beautiful city. I mean, to be honest, one of the first things we actually went and saw were the metro stations underground. They were designed as basically, artworks for the people of the time. And we were just hopping around to little stations to admire the architecture. And I found that, in general, Uzbekistan is just a pretty country. There's a lot to take photos of. There's beautiful buildings, wonderful mosques. It's just stunning in photos. I'm struggling to put it into words, and I write for a living, Matt. It was that beautiful. But we spent a few days there. We enjoyed some fantastic food. The fact that you can also speak a tiny bit of Russian helped us get around. But I sort of got the feeling that even if you didn't, you would still be fine.
Yeah, I think we flew with Uzbekistan Airways in their very, very cheap business class
That's right.
from
That's what we
Tashkent
did.
to Bukhara. That was about $50 for a business
It was
class ticket, wasn't it?
It was nothing. I
On
mean,
an
there's no
A320?
lounge before the flight, and look, we got some pastries from the cafe to bring on board. But look, it's a comfortable seat. It was a modern aircraft. It was a very, very comfortable flight. And yes, we got the high-speed rail after that. But Bukhara was fantastic. I think we jumped in a tuk-tuk to save some time, but we otherwise just explored the whole place on foot. We had locals coming up to us, sort of just wondering, not in a rude or confrontational way. They were just wondering why we're there, what tourists are possibly doing in our city. Why would they want to visit us? And it's the most beautiful place. And Samarkand, I mean, the Registan is so picturesque. And I think we happened to be there on the one night a year that, in addition to the light show, they also do a drone show. And the crowds were huge, and we were there just after New Year in Samarkand, and it was so beautiful. We then hopped across to Almaty in Kazakhstan on Fly Aristan, which was actually created by the CEO of now former Bonza. So there's a little bit of a connection there to Australia, but honestly, Kazakhstan, it was snowing. It was. It's all just so beautiful, Matt. Maybe you can put some words together a bit better than I can here. But
Yeah, Almaty is honestly probably my favorite city in Asia. I actually went skiing. I stayed a little bit longer than Chris, and I went skiing after Chris left. But yeah, it's surrounded by mountains. It's beautiful. It's also got one of those Soviet-style metros, similar to Tashkent. There's mosques, there's five-star hotels, there's one-star hotels, and everything in between. Lots to do. I also did a day trip out to Sharon Canyon and to see some of the lakes around there, which was absolutely stunning. I would almost say it was better than the Grand Canyon.
And I mean, once we're done with nature, let's not forget Kazakhstan also has that imitation McDonald's that's happened in recent years.
Yes, they did. I think it's gone through a few different iterations of the past few years. Kazakhstan did used to have McDonald's. It had a name change of the stuff that happened with Russia. I think it became Moyot Koritki or something, and it's now just called I'm, like I apostrophe M.
But it looks exactly the same. The restaurants are the same. The food is the same. The little kiosk you order from, it is exactly the same. There are, the Happy Meal is something called I'm Happy. It's hilarious if you just want to laugh, honestly, and you just need a quick stop. But
it was quite amusing.
Yeah.
Kazakhstan has two main cities. It has Almaty, which is the biggest one, and Astana, which is the second biggest and the capital city. I just think it's worth mentioning. Astana is a much more architecturally interesting. It's got some absolutely hilarious buildings like gold pyramids and random towers. And it was designed as a planned city by quite a well-renowned architect. But I do think that Almaty has a bit more soul and more things to do and see. So if you're thinking about which places to visit, I would say Almaty is probably the pick of the bunch.
And if you're going to Uzbekistan, it's very, very easy to get around. So, I mean, they do have their domestic airlines. They've also got high-speed rail. It is slightly difficult to book those tickets, especially we booked at quite short notice. And I think, Matt, you managed to grab the last couple of seats on the particular train that we wanted. But it's very well connected.
Yeah, that high speed train was brilliant. It's like it was genuinely high speed. It's better than anything we have in Australia.
Imagine that between Sydney and Melbourne. I mean, they get it done over there, really.
Yeah, we went in winter. It was obviously a little bit cold. Summer can be quite hot. Would you like to try again visiting maybe in the summer?
That sounds like an invitation, Matt. You're going to tempt me again to book another flight. But yeah, it would be wonderful to experience the difference. I think because it was snowing the day that we arrived. It sort of cleared up a bit, and we got a bit of snow on at least the last day that I was there. You stayed on to ski, but it would be really really interesting to see that when it's warm because there are a lot of things that close for the winter. We went up to the top of that peak in the city in Kazakhstan, and half of those attractions and things are shut. So it would be very very cool. I think to see that in summer.
Yeah, and a very affordable destination.
Absolutely. Everything was, oh my God. I got home from that trip and I wondered if I'd even been charged for some of the things that we bought. It seemed that everything costs a dollar or two, other than the hotel, of course, and the flights, but everything around, I think it was like a half hour taxi ride and we might have paid $8 or something. It is nothing. It's so cheap.
So we travelled there together from Sydney. Chris, do you want to run through how did we get there?
Yeah, so we booked around a month or two before departure to leave Australia just after Christmas Day and Boxing Day, which, as you know, everyone does the big meals with their families and then they disappear and go on holidays to Europe and things. So it's very hard to get a seat. So we left Sydney and went to Abu Dhabi on Etihad. The only reward seat we could get on any airline out of Australia was economy on Etihad using our Velocity points. But the flight was like $150 from here to the Middle East, and we were able to pay slightly more to get two seats together at the back of the plane without, a seat buddy. It was just a pair of two, which is fine. It's kind of like a daytime flight. You get there at night and then go to bed. So we landed in Abu Dhabi. When you fly Etihad Economy, they have a free bus service you can use use to Dubai. And a little tip: if you organise that with Etihad after booking with your Velocity points, you don't have to pay extra fees as you would if you booked through VA. So we got to Dubai. We then flew. This is the airline with the Georgian red wine that Matt is so fond of. We flew from Dubai to Tashkent via Almaty. Of course, we went back to Almaty later in the trip, but we got in the morning. It was beautiful weather, snowing, nice glimpse just after Christmas, just before New Year.
As you mentioned, I am very fond of that airline. We flew with Air Astana, the Kazakh national airline from Dubai to Tashkent. People often ask me what my favorite airline is. It's actually Air Astana. I have flown Turkish Airlines and Singapore Airlines and Emirates and Qatar, but the service on Air Astana to me is just second to none. The food is excellent. I think we had a lovely plov on our flight over from Dubai to Almaty.
And we were in economy on that first leg too. And you get an amenity kit, you get everything. We were able to get a cash upgrade to business on the next flight, which was not very expensive. But even in economy, I remember I had Chianti. I think that's the only airline I've seen serve proper Chianti in economy. And actually want more of the wine served in economy. I would expect to see that in business on other carriers.
It was very, very good. And I think they even had Kazakh vodka on the trolley for free in economy class. So, yeah, very good airline. They also have my favorite onboard wine that I've ever found on board an airline. It's a lovely red wine. Unfortunately, they only serve it in business class on their long haul routes, so we didn't get it to Tashkent. But definitely a good reason to fly with Air Astana. How did you get back from Central Asia, Chris?
Yeah, so you stayed on and stayed overseas for a good 5 months or something, whereas I had to go back. Obviously, at that time of year and booking so late, there were no reward seats at all. But I was able to get a reasonably priced cash ticket on Qatar Airways from Kazakhstan to Abu Dhabi via Doha. And then as soon as I booked, I was able to confirm an upgrade on those flights using Avios, which was a nice way to fly. Quick overnight in Abu Dhabi. Again, it was the same thing as leaving Australia. The only flights I could even get a reward seat on was Etihad. It was in economy, but at least at the time I had Velocity Platinum status, and I was able to go into the Etihad first class lounge in Abu Dhabi before the flight, which is in their brand new terminal. So it's a very nice lounge, very pretty. And again, that flight home was about $150, give or take. And that one went into Melbourne on the 787. So from there, it was back home, back in Australia.
I'm going to be trying out the Etihad First Class Lounge in Abu Dhabi very, very shortly. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit better than the, quote-unquote business lounge in Almaty.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so if you haven't been to that airport and haven't been to that terminal, it's probably a good thing. But
yeah, great city. Just the airport lets it down a little bit. They are building a new one, though. I will point out.
I wondered at first where we'd landed because Matt had been there before. I'd never been there before, and we're trying to get through a transit area, and there's no one to unlock that path. We're sort of stuck at immigration without being able to get around where we need to go. But we finally get through the formalities and get up to the lounge, and It is literally a lounge room. So it is a room. It has some chairs in it. There is a bar, but almost nothing is free. And they have this interesting thing where they have this little premium corner of the lounge that actually has some snacks and nibbles. But if you've come in on Air Astana or Priority Pass and things like that, you can't access that premium corner. So because I'd done that upgrade on Qatar and because I had Oneworld Emerald status with Qatar, either of them covers access to the lounge, I was able to flash my boarding pass on the flight home and go and explore that little premium section of the buffet and have a small bowl of nuts and apricots that was otherwise not permitted to be taken by anybody else in that lounge. And my boarding pass was inspected. It had to be noted that I was a passenger of Qatar before I could even get close to the nibbles on the bench. It was hilarious. I think I sent you a photo. You're skiing and I'm at the airport. And I'm like, well, I'm glad I upgraded because now I have free nuts in the lounge. And this is exciting, Matt. This is exciting. So that they could not build that terminal fast enough, honestly.
I think it's just recently opened, which is
Fantastic.
great news. I have to be honest, like I love Almaty, I love Air Astana. That airport has a lot of charm actually, but that lounge is probably the worst one I've ever been to.
The old Qantas Club in Karatha before they did the refurbishment for me probably is up there. It's literally this room hidden in the corner of an airport, and I think it's very similar in Almaty.
Thankfully, I think both of those are now being refurbished. So that's
Karatha has been done. We're still waiting on Almaty. So there we go. Beautiful city, though.
If you're not traveling during Christmas and New Year, there are also sometimes options to get there through Korea. There are quite a few flights between Seoul and Almaty or Seoul and Tashkent with Asiana and Korean Air, also with Air Astana and Uzbekistan Airways. So that could be one option. AirAsia X has also recently started flying from Kuala Lumpur to Almaty with very, very cheap cash fares, or you can even go premium flatbed for quite a reasonable price. So that could be another El Cheapo method to get there from Australia. And just one final trick that I would like to mention. If you're looking for an interesting way to get to Europe, Air Astana has some very good business class fares from Thailand to either Frankfurt or London, and you can actually book those via Kazakhstan with a free stopover in Kazakhstan. And Air Astana will even sell you a stopover package for $19 a night.
And you don't need a visa for Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. I should mention that as well. You can literally, there's no even ESTA type arrangement. You just turn up and they welcome you. It's wonderful.
Literally, they did. I'm not sure what your experience was like, Chris, in Tashkent, but coming into Tashkent, literally, the immigration officer stamped my passport, looked me in the eye, smiled, and said, from the bottom of his heart, "Welcome to Uzbekistan." And it was so lovely. I really did feel welcome. It was a very, very nice experience.
It's a beautiful place. Definitely get there. Well, that's all for the first episode of Travel Pointers.
We hope you've enjoyed the episode, and we can't wait to share more travel pointers with you each month. We'd love to hear your feedback as well. If you liked this podcast, please rate and review us on your preferred podcasting platform, and of course, tell your friends.
We'll be back next month with another episode.
Happy flying.
Safe travels.